Hello, my friends. Welcome. My name is Joe. This is the Joe Martino Show. And today we're going to talk about how do we show up for friends who have survived a tragic loss of a loved one. How do we present ourselves in a way that's helpful to them? Let's kick it off. This is the Joe Martino Show.
You're listening to The Joe Martino Show, a podcast dealing with all things emotional, relational, and human nature. Joe is a licensed counselor in the state of Michigan, specializing in relationship therapy. He is also the author of the book, The Emotionally Secure Couple. All advice offered in this episode is offered for entertainment and educational purposes only. Enjoy the show.
All right, welcome back. I hope that your day is going well. Wherever your day is, I hope that you are having a good day. Today, I want to talk to you about what should you do when tragedy strikes with your friends. I was talking to somebody about a previous episode about the lady who wrote in and said, hey, what's the big deal about men's mental health? And I was talking about how, one of the things we need to do is show up for people who've been through that. And my friend asked legitimately, okay, well, what does that look like? And I think that's a great question. So we want to talk today about what should we do when tragedy strikes our friends? That's a great question. And so that's what we're going to dive into today. Okay, so the very first thing in how we show up for our friends who have grief is quite literally we show up. And what I mean by that is you stop by their house. And I know, when I was a kid, people would come by the house kind of unexpectedly. They would just show up and they would come in and they would sit at the kitchen table and we would brew either hot water for tea or coffee and we would sit there and chat. That doesn't happen really as much anymore. Somewhere in the last few years, right? We don't need to get into how old I am. Somewhere in the last few years, that has changed. And people don't really show up at someone's house. I remember one time I bought somebody a gift that I just wanted to give them. And I was like, hey, can I swing by your house? And I could read the hesitancy in his text response. Oh, man, I don't know. I'm like, look. And finally I said, look, I realize that you probably have stuff going on. And I need to be there for 30 seconds and I can leave. And then it was okay, which is fine. Like, I'm not saying that as judgment because the guy that I'm talking about is a good guy. That's just the reality that we live in. But I'm telling you, those rules change, especially in the immediate aftermath of tragedy striking a friend's life. Just show up. Just drive into their house. Don't drive into their house because that would cause more problems. Drive to their house, get out of your car, knock on the door, give them a hug, and stand there for 2 minutes and talk to them. And then leave. But just the rhythm of showing up reminds them that they're not alone. When you're going through tragedy, one of the biggest things that happens is you end up feeling like you're alone. Because here's the thing. When the tragedy first happens, most people are there, right? There's meals. People show up. There's the viewing. There's the funeral. There's all of those things. There's the outpouring of cards and flowers. But then people want to get back to their normal life. At least that's what it feels like. People want to get back to their normal life. And they don't really want to be brought down by re-engaging the sorrow that you're feeling. And I'm not here to judge that, but I'm just telling you, if you want to help your friends, just show up. Physically show up. I cannot tell you how important that is. And then when you do show up, number 2, the second thing we need to be able to do, be okay in silence. Be okay in uncomfortable silence. Because all the normal rules are gone, right? There is no like, hey, how are you doing? Well, I'm not doing well. Now, in the moment, maybe like, hey, how are things in the moment? But one of the biggest things that happens when people aren't comfortable with silence is they say things that actually are stupid. I'm not saying they're stupid. I'm saying the things that they say are stupid. And they say things that actually cause more distress and accomplish the exact opposite of what they're trying to do. And I think this is part of the reason that people don't show up, because they don't want to cause more distress. But rather than just making their mouth stay still and not saying anything, just silence, they say something and they're like, man, I wish I hadn't said that. So just be okay with silence. One of the things when I'm working with couples in the counseling room, I'll talk about how there are 2 types of responses to distress. Some people talk a lot and some people just shut down and don't talk. And I will literally say, and some people just, and then I just start counting the seconds on the second hand of the clock. Very, very rarely do I make it to 30 seconds before one of the people on the couch tries to fill in the silence. In fact, I went an entire year, 2022, I went the entire year without anyone making it 30 seconds before they tried to fill in the silence. I don't remember for sure. I wrote it down in my journal somewhere, but I think I only made it 20 seconds where people were trying to fill in the silence. And so one of the distressful things that you have to consider is that when you show up, you have to be okay sitting in silence, because there's not a lot of good answers. There's not a lot, and that's one of the things we seek, right, is answers. But there's not a lot of good answers when someone is struggling. When a loved one just died, there's not a lot of good answers. And we need to expect that it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable because we're going through grief, and that's okay. The better you are at being okay with silence, and uncomfortable silence at that, the more frequently you'll be able to show up. But now here's what I'm not saying. If you're not okay with it, that's not a good excuse to not show up. If you want to be there for your friends, you need to show up and just be silent. Just show up and be silent. All right, so the first one is literally physically show up. The second one is be okay with silence. The third one is solve things as you hear them. So a lot of people, what they do is when they show up and they're like, hey, if you need anything, just let me know. Maybe they shoot a text. Hey, if you need anything, just let me know. Here's the problem with that. Most of the time, the people that are the survivors, the people that are left in the aftermath of the tragedy, they're overwhelmed. They don't know what they need, and they don't want to feel like a burden to you. They don't want to be a problem. And so just solve a problem. If you hear that they're looking for something, or you hear, hey, we're trying to do this, just do it. And if you don't know, just show up with something. Literally, show up with a meal. Show up with money. Show up and cut their grass. Show up and wash dishes. When my mom was in the hospital for 6 months with complications from surgery, and there was a woman in her church who just showed up and scrubbed the kitchen floor and cleaned the kitchen. Just showed up one day. Hey, I'm here to clean the kitchen. She solved problems as she heard them and recognized them. And it's good. I'm telling you, the truth is, the more you show up, the more you engage, the more problems you're going to hear about. And then you get to decide. And some of them you won't be able to solve. Some of them you might not be able to do anything about. But the ones you can, go for it. Do something with them. Solve the problems as you hear them. Avoid the question as much as possible. Avoid the question, hey, is there anything you need? Because they're not going to tell you. And they're not going to not tell you because there's some level of trouble. They're not going to tell you because of a host of emotional reasons on their side, or they're just flat out overwhelmed. So just show up. Just solve the problems that you see or hear about. And if you don't see or hear about any, that's fine too. Like, one of the things that I think we underestimate is we underestimate the value of presence, of just being present for someone that's in pain, of just being present for someone that's in trouble. So you solve the problem as you hear them. You show up. Be okay with silence, but then when you do hear things or you see things, do what you can. But just keep showing up. Really, if we just said that, just show up, like physically show up, that would be great. And read the room, right? Like I have a friend that I'll stop by and see, and sometimes when I drive by his house, there's a lot of cars in the driveway, so I just keep on driving. Right? I don't have to be there, because here's the thing, you're going there for them. And so you just show up. And when you can solve problems, you do. That's an easy one. I have a friend that tragedy struck his family, and I said, okay, that's fine. You're going to get therapy just for whatever your copay would be, because I don't want any barriers between your therapy. And before somebody gets all excited, no, they're not seeing me. Just solve the problems as you see them. Be okay with not having answers. This would be number 4. Be okay with not having answers, which is not the same thing as silence. Right? Like one of the things that you have to expect is their emotions are going to be all over the place. And your emotions are going to be all over the place. We don't like to come close to tragedy. And so when we are, we're going to feel big feelings, and that's okay. Where we get in trouble is sometimes we feel like we don't have answers, because we don't. Be okay with not having answers. Be okay with the same questions on repeat. Why is a question that people ask a lot, and there's rarely, if ever, an actual answer to that. There's certainly rarely, if ever, a good answer to that. Why did this happen? I don't know, because sometimes life is just hard and I don't really have good answers. I'm sorry. Be okay saying I'm sorry. Be okay engaging in empathetic behaviors, which is just standing there with the person, participating in their grief. It's okay. Yeah, I don't have good answers. I wish I did, but I don't. Why? I don't know. And that's almost an anathema word for us, right? That's a great old school word that reads really, really bad. But just be okay not having the answers that you want to have. Because let's be honest, if you're showing up for your friend, if you're working on these things, you're there because you want to help them. And your brain's going to scream at you. You got to have some answer. But the reality, the hardest thing about life is sometimes we just don't have good answers. And bad things typically happen when we pretend to have answers that we don't. So just be okay sitting in that space and saying, I don't know why this happened. And when they're like, I'm so sad, or I'm so angry, or I'm so numb. Yeah, I can imagine. I'm really sorry. Or me too. Right? Like, I really think we get empathy wrong in society today. Far more often than we get it right. But this is one of the places where if you do that, you're getting it right. This is one of the times where if you just stand there and be like, yeah, me too, I'm sorry, you're getting it right. Certainty is the opposite of empathy, right? The only thing I'm certain of is I don't have good answers in this situation. And there's really not a wrong way to grieve unless you're hurting other people. Unless you're bringing harm to other people, there's really not a bad way. Like, there's no game plan for this. And I don't have good answers for you. I don't know why this happened the way that it did. And I'm sorry that it happened the way that it did. Whatever it is. A friend of mine's mom just passed away. And I just told her, I'm so sorry. I told her dad, I'm so sorry. That's it. That's all I can say. I don't have good answers. I can't wrestle. I can wrestle with the esoteric questions like, why did God let this happen? Or why did the cosmic universe let this happen? But there's really not good answers. And when we try to put good answers in a place where there really aren't any, we often just bring more harm than we do good. So be okay not having all the answers. You should really probably practice that skill for all of life, but you should definitely practice it for situations like this. All right, number 5, don't take it personally. If you're hanging out, if you're consistently showing up with people who are in high grief, they're going to have emotions all over the place. And sometimes something's going to happen that's going to hurt your feelings, or that you're going to feel like, I don't know what to do. It's okay. Don't take it personally. Your job is to just show up and be an emotional and physical presence for your friend. That's it. So don't take it personally when they ask you to leave. Maybe they need space to cry. Maybe they need some alone time. Don't take it personally when they're laughing. We have so many constructs for how other people should live their lives that over things that we've never experienced, that sometimes it's very difficult for us to just be present and just let that run. Just let that go. Just let that keep going. Whatever it is that's happening, just let them live. And don't take it personally. All right, so the 5 things. Show up, like physically show up. Be okay with silence. Solve things as you hear them. Be okay not having all the answers, and don't take it personally. Now, here's the thing. There's probably a lot more things we can do, but those will come out of doing these 5 things. Also, kind of as a bonus, I would say truly expect that it will take longer than you think. Showing up will be much longer. It might be years. Their grief might manifest itself in different ways for decades, depending on what happened. So be okay with just continually showing up. We're not here to win a prize. We're not here to measure outcomes. We're just here to support our friends. All right, so hopefully this is helpful. I thought that was a great question. What does it mean to show up? Great question by my friend, and hopefully that question sparked a good episode for you. If you enjoyed this, please share it with your friends. I can't tell you how helpful that is to me. Lots of exciting things coming very soon. We will see you next week. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend. And hey, give us that rating in your podcast store. Until next time, change possible.